The Defender 110 is definitely a car for people who love cars and for people who love adventure. And if you're the sort of person who loves cars, chances are you're going to love the Defender. Like my wife is very much a car person. She gets all the magazines, watches all the shows. She has had a Defender in one form or other since she was 18 years old. And now, she won't like me saying this, almost 40 years later, we still have a Defender. So look, the Defender 110, vehicle built for the modern explorer, expedition ready, good for cities, good for outside the cities. My kids learn how to drive a car on a Defender in the desert in Kuwait because, again, Defender is great for the city, great for the highway driving, great for any kind of regular driving, but great for off-roading too, which made the desert a perfect place to teach them. So the Defender is a vehicle built for extremes. It has a lot of endurance, but it looks great. And the Defender 110 has 5 seats with the option of 7, good for a big family. Also has 3D surround cameras with clear sight ground view, clear sight rear view, so you have an unobstructed rear view, even when there are things blocking your rear view. Next generation Pivy Pro infotainment system, good for the kids. And intuitive driver displays that are good for the drivers. Explore the Defender 110 at LandRoverUSA.com. I'm very excited we're at this point now. I've given 1 or 2 or similar book frameworks like this before to people, and I would say hundreds of people now have written books in 30 days using one of the ideas I'm about to present to you.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
The first one, I'll give you a little bonus framework. I'll describe a framework that I've used and how you can use it to write your first book in 30 days. This is perhaps the simplest of all book frameworks that I'm going to describe. So at one point, I wanted to write a book about what makes billionaires, what are the habits of billionaires, and what makes billionaires different from other people. Are they special? Is there something in common among all billionaires? So I have a podcast, and among the many people I've interviewed have been many billionaires. So Richard Branson, Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx, Mark Cuban, Ray Dalio, many billionaires from all backgrounds, all sorts of businesses, all sorts of industries. So here's the book framework now. I took the transcript of each interview and edited it heavily so that it would read well as a chapter, because just reading a conversation does not read well. But I did heavy amount of editing so it would read well as a chapter. Then I wrote an introduction and an outro, meaning a conclusion to each chapter. And in the introduction, I might tell one of my own stories like, oh, I was once in a similar business, but didn't do as well. Or these are the things that were said by this person that really changed my mind about this, this, and this. And I would tell some personal stories. And then I might tell a little bit more of the personal story and background of the person I was introducing, and also what was fascinating to me about them. Then I would get into the edited interview, again, heavily edited interview, and then an outro, again, summarizing what I learned and what the key takeaways are, and maybe a list of bullet points of what I think homework or key takeaways for the reader should be. And I put that all together, and I wrote an introduction for the whole book about why this was interesting to me, why I was so curious about billionaires, how I started interviewing them, why I started interviewing them. I talked about my own story of maybe struggling with money at different points, and does one really need $1 billion, or what is the magic number? So I wrote an introduction with stories and storytelling. And at the end of the book, again, I wrote a conclusion, which again tells stories and summarizes maybe the common things among the billionaires. Can also write an intermediate chapter like, oh, here's a concept that everybody's talking about. They all journal. And I would write a chapter, here's techniques on journaling, and so on. By the way, I'm not the only one who's done the podcast technique for writing a book. There's a really great book by Tim Ferriss called Tools of the Titans. And all it is the exact same thing I just described to you. It is edited transcripts of podcasts he did. By the way, there's a chapter about me in there. I'm one of the Titans. I'm really grateful for that. But Tools of the Titans was a book he wrote 100% based on his podcast. He did another one, which was even a more simple technique, which is he emailed questions to 100 people and edited heavily the answers and the email dialogue he had with each person and called that the Tribe of Mentors. And that was also a best-selling book. So this kind of podcast framework works very well to write a book in 30 days, particularly if you've already done the interviews. And for the 2 million people out there who have done a podcast and have episodes, pick a category that you've spoken to many people about in your podcast, and then you could write, think like a blah, blah, blah. I talked to this idea with a friend of mine, Brian Keating, who wrote the book, Losing the Nobel Prize. And he wrote a book called Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner, where he used the podcast technique, summarizing his interviews and what he learned from the many Nobel Prize winners that he's interviewed on his podcast. So this is a well-known technique. When you write it, it'll be different from other people who use this technique. Like I'm sure if you use the podcast technique, it'll be different from any book I write, any book Tim Ferriss writes, and on and on. So it's a bonus framework I'm giving to describe how I'm going to give 4 different frameworks by which you can write a book and publish the book in the next 30 days. So let's check out the next 4 concepts or frameworks you can use. The 101 technique is a tried and fun and perhaps one of the easiest ways to write a good, valuable book in the next 30 days. And when I say it's a tried technique, I remember when I was a kid growing up, there was this book I bought, The 100 Most Influential People in History. And all my friends bought it, and my parents bought it, and many adults I knew bought it. And people would spend hours arguing, about the list of like who should be on the list of 100 most influential people. And people would argue, should Napoleon really be more influential than George Washington? Was Jesus really more influential than Muhammad? I mean, this listed the 100 most influential people all throughout history. And it was just the opinion of the author, but he told story after story about who these people were, why they were influential, and so on. So here's the technique. Pick an area that fascinates you, that you would love to research, and that you would love to learn more about. So each day for the next 10 days, or maybe every other day, however long you want, make a list of 10 items that you completely did not know about this area. I'll give you an example specifically of entrepreneurship. So let's say you were going to write a book, 101 things you need to know about entrepreneurship, or 101 unusual things you need to know about entrepreneurship. You could say, number 1, the average millionaire has 5 different sources of income according to the IRS. So now you show the proof, you give a source, and then you tell a story. Oh, Richard Branson runs 400 companies, but what were his first 5 sources of income? Or maybe you write about Walt Disney and how his first source of income was making little animated shorts for movies. Then his second source of income was watches. His third source of income was theme parks. And then finally, his 4th or 5th source of income started with movies with Snow White. So you could talk about examples through history, but also your own personal examples of how it benefited you or some family member or some friend when they started to have multiple sources of income. So that's just item number 1 on the 101 things you need to know. Item number 2, and this is very fascinating, only 30% of startups fail, according to the Small Business Administration. Now, I've always been told 90% of startups fail, but actually that's not true. And you could talk about many categories of businesses that one can start that it probably won't fail. Like most McDonald's franchises, for instance, don't fail. Most laundromats, if they're put in a good location, don't fail. Most car washes don't fail, again, if they're in a good location. So each item, you're going to have 101 items altogether about entrepreneurship. You'll have, again, a description of what that item means and the proof of it. Like, is it really true that only 30% of businesses, of startups fail? And then you could talk about either a story that you read about or a story from history or a personal story. And by the way, it's easy to research these things. Just go to Google and type in 10 unusual things about entrepreneurship, 10 unusual things about small businesses, 10 unusual pieces of data you could learn from the IRS. And gradually, you'll get, over the course of 10 to 15 days, 101 unusual things about entrepreneurship that everyone needs to know. And again, for each item, you write a couple of stories, you write the proof, the source, maybe a personal story combined with a historical story. And within 20, 25 days, you're going to have the first draft of a book, and then it'll take you the next few days to publish it using the techniques we're going to describe. I want to talk for a second about the concept of a listicle. So why can't it just be things every entrepreneur needs to know? Well, I'll tell you, people love lists. They like 101 unusual things every entrepreneur needs to know. This is all throughout history. Think about the most successful pieces of text ever written in history. Think of them all as books or blog posts. For instance, in 1500 BC, there was a blogger who wrote the 10 Commandments. They had a blog on stone back then. So Moses wrote the 10 Commandments. In 300 BC, a young blogger named Buddha wrote the Four Noble Truths. And that became so popular, it was actually became competitive to Hinduism. So in Hinduism, around the same time, people who were interested in yoga wrote the 108 Yoga Sutras, which is text that still exists to this day. In 1517, maybe one of the most popular pieces of text ever was a listicle, the 95 Theses. This was written by Martin Luther and caused half of Europe to split off from Catholicism. And even more recently, you have people like Robert Greene wrote the 48 Laws of Mastery. You have Stephen Covey wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Jordan Peterson wrote 12 Rules for Life. I'll just give you some other examples you could think about writing about. For instance, you could write a book, 101 Secrets the U.S. government is keeping from you. By the way, great topic for someone to have you on as a podcast guest. But here are some secrets the U.S. government doesn't regularly share with people. If you're in New York City and afraid of a terrorist attack, stay at the Waldorf Astoria. How come? Because presidents usually stay there because below the ground floor is an exit, a secret exit to Track 61, which is a secret train track that takes you right to Grand Central and allows you to quickly get out of New York City. Here's another secret the government probably doesn't want you to know. If you want to avoid taxes and live in a beautiful spot and still be in the U.S., the U.S. Virgin Islands has a top federal tax rate of 3.35% instead of the top federal tax rate of 39% in the States. Again, useful thing the U.S. government doesn't want you to know. And a very easy topic to research. You can easily put together enough items in 20 days to write a book. And also, it's a great one to market. First off, for each item, like take that Waldorf Astoria one. When did they make that? Was it ever used? Who was the first president who insisted on this? And do presidents still stay at the Waldorf Astoria to this day? What happened the last time you stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, if ever? Or what hotels do you stay at in New York City? What other secrets might there be? Or is there really a bunker under the White House, for instance? So all of these things are interesting, could be interesting articles, could be interesting Twitter threads, could be interesting Facebook posts, could get you on podcasts, could be email newsletters, but it's great also as a book. And there is a tried and true history of people writing these listicles, and it's easy to research. I highly recommend checking out Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Mastery to see how he combines his 48 laws with storytelling, but also just remind yourself the 10 Commandments, probably the thing read by the most number of people, billions of people, was a listicle. Now you're just adding to that long and good tradition of books based on lists.
I think if you love cars, you love the Defender. We have a Defender, and my wife, she's had a Defender in one version or other since she was 18 years old, since she started driving. And our kids even learn how to drive on a Defender. They learn how to drive on the desert in Kuwait because not only is Defender, of course, great highway driving, but you could drive it. It's great for off-roading. You could drive it on the desert. And that was the place where my kids learned how to drive a car. That's why the Defender is the vehicle that's basically adapted for the city, but also for beyond. The Defender 90 is the original 2-door Defender body design. It's a smaller silhouette, but fits for journeys of all size. There's 3D surround cameras with clear sight ground view, so it lets you see underneath the vehicle and anticipate obstacles and rough terrain. Again, for the urban city, and beyond. There's a next-gen Pivi Pro infotainment system, which of course is great for 3 kids driving in the back seat, and intuitive driver displays that are customizable to your journey. Explore the Defender 90 at LandRoverUSA.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Everybody loves habits and books about habits. Everybody wants the best habits for health, for success, for financial success, for relationship success. What are good habits for writers? What are good habits for salesmen? And on and on. I mean, I've had on my podcast Charles Duhigg, who wrote the book The Power of Habit, millions of copies sold. Atomic Habits by James Clear, 15 million copies sold. I don't know how many copies sold, but he's got 89,000 reviews. And I know it's over 10 million copies sold. So people love habits. And this is another category or another framework where you could write many books. But of course, we're focused on writing our first book in 30 days is pick a category you would like to have better habits in or a category you're fascinated by, and then search for academic research on habits for entrepreneurs, habits for golf players, habits for salespeople, habits for whatever it is you're interested in, best habits for cooking. So habits books always sell well. You can write them easily, and it makes you an expert on this combination of a favorite topic, habits for musicians, for instance. Anything you want combined with habits. Again, it's an example of idea sex, like in the Jesus diet technique. And I'll show you a couple examples where I search on habits for golf players or habits for salespeople. And what happens is, again, you'll find academic research papers. And what do we know about academic research papers again? They're impossible to read. So that gives you the benefit of you could take this academic research, summarize each habit that's discussed in each paper, to summarize why it works according to the scientists, the proof that it works, which is all the data that they collected when studying this habit. I was searching on habits for golf players, and I came across a research paper on specifically habits for golf players who are doctors and the effects this golf has actually on their medical practices. So it also goes the other way, where it might be that golf players get good habits for other things. And that's just one specific example. But again, the specific is you have an introduction where, don't forget, you use the 6 U's, where you talk about habits and why you're looking at the habits of whatever topic it is, like entrepreneurship, sales, golf. Then each chapter is another technique produced by academic research, why the technique works, the proof, so on. And then personal stories that maybe you know from history, or and that's easy, it's easily Googleable to find, or even the research paper might mention stories from history or personal stories from yourself. You do one a day for 20 to 30 days. Now you have 20 to 30 chapters plus an introduction, and boom, you have a book. You publish it on Amazon. And by the way, a month later, you could publish The Habits of another thing, The Habits of Doctors, The Habits of Teachers, The Habits of Firemen, The Habits of Astronauts. You can go on and on. You can write 100 books like this. Why do I say you can write 100 books like this? Well, the goal is each one of these, I'm teaching you how to write a book in 30 days. So that means you could write 12 books in a year or more, because you could work on some books simultaneously. And the goal ultimately is some books will succeed. Some books might not succeed as much, but you'll get cash flow coming in from hundreds of different books over the next couple of years. And that could be a valuable source of income. You can make your living passively from just this passive income from all of these books you've been writing. So I think it's really important to learn these ideas of writing a book in 30 days. Not only that, but the other things I've mentioned in the introduction to this course, which is that a book is your business card. A book makes you credible so that you might get the speaking engagement or the consulting gig or get on the podcast or start a podcast or get an email newsletter. There's many ideas in the spoken wheel technique that can propel you forward once you start writing books. But a habits book is, again, a tried and true strategy for writing a book in 30 days, writing a book that will sell, writing a book that will help people, and potentially building a valuable source of passive income. So this was the habits technique. This next framework, again, is a tried and true throughout history framework for writing a fun, informative, knowledgeable, and easy to write book. One thing I want to remind you too, we're not limited by the myth of length. It doesn't have to be 250 pages. It could be 20 pages, 30 pages, 70 pages, whatever you want. We're trying to write a book, in 30 days, we're trying to write, in many cases, your first book. So let's talk about the Jesus diet technique. And by the way, it's a technique, but it's also a very specific idea for a book. And I'll explain what I mean. A friend of mine, his name was Matt, he lost his job, had a little bit of money, but was going to run out fast. So he picked up his bags, moved out of New York City, which is expensive to live in, and he moved to Medellin in Colombia, where it was much cheaper to live. And he had his idea. He was going to write basically a book called The Jesus Diet. So what was Jesus's diet? Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. Do we really know what he ate? Well, we do know a couple of things. We know that many people are inspired by the life of Jesus, of course, all of Christianity. And many people want to live and behave like Jesus because he is the holiest person ever in Christianity. And so it makes sense to write a book. Well, what did Jesus eat? And how can I treat my body the way Jesus treated his body? So in terms of diet. Well, we actually do know what Jesus ate. A little bit of research would show that he roughly ate the Mediterranean diet, a diet that's called the Mediterranean diet. Now, there are many types of diets out there, of course. And we know diet books do well. There's keto diets, there's low carb diets, there's all meat diets, and it's kind of the same thing. But the Mediterranean diet is well known. It was covered in a book called The Blue Zones, where he looked at the eating habits of people who have a high quality of life well into the age of 100 or above. And it turns out that many of these people, that a blue zone area, that's a location where there are many people who live to be 100, is in the Mediterranean. And it's probably because they eat a Mediterranean diet. What's a Mediterranean diet? It's certain kinds of fish, it's hummus, it's baba ganoush, it's certain kinds of vegetables, and, certain sizes of portions. So you would do research on the history of the area, the history of the culture. Are there any examples in the Bible where Jesus talks about food? I don't know, but that would have to be part of the research. There'd be research into the archaeology of how people cooked back then, or what sort of foods maybe they ate then that we don't eat as much now. And again, it's a real diet. It's known to be healthy, the Mediterranean diet. If you wrote a book called The Jesus Diet, you could have quotes and inspirational stories about Jesus. You could have scientific facts about the Mediterranean diet. You could have recipes about the Mediterranean diet. And so this is what my friend did. and he actually sold it as an online course and made enough money that he was able to live for several years in Colombia. I lost touch with him since then, so I don't know what he's working on now. Maybe he's still living off this. Now, again, I'm going to talk about this in a second as a technique, but I want to talk specifically, well, he already did this. So are you saying I can't do this? No, I actually have never read what he did. I just knew he did a book or a course called The Jesus Diet. You could do the exact same thing and you'll come up with different religious stories, different recipes, different stories from the archaeology of the area, different stories about the science of the Mediterranean diet, plus maybe your own experiences as a Christian or your own experiences trying different diets. So I'm actually, in part, recommending you can write the Jesus Diet. And again, I'll get to the technique in a second. But what's great about this one is there are sequels, diets of the saints, for instance, or the diets of other religious figures in Christianity. But here's the actual technique, of which this is just one example. You take a religious concept or a religious leader and you combine it with another high value, important topic that sells well. And I call this idea sex, where you take one idea in one area of life and combine it with another idea in another area of life, combine them together and see what the result is. So I like the idea of combining, important areas from modern life with ancient religions and spiritual practices and spiritual leaders. And this is, again, not a new idea. There's Zen and the Art of Archery was a best-selling book for many years. There's The Inner Game of Tennis, which is partly based on Taoism and partly based on tennis. There's the Tao of Pooh. There's The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu, and Stephen Pressfield combined that with writing techniques. So he wrote The War of Art rather than The Art of War, but he was using ideas from The Art of War mixed with ideas he had about writing. So let's think of some others. For instance, if I were to Google right now, Jesus and salesman, there's over 8 million results. So what about, is Jesus the greatest salesman in the world? Or what would be the book title? The Sales Techniques of Jesus. And again, there's 8 million Google results when I search for that. So it's not a completely unique idea, but you make it unique with your own take on Christianity, on Jesus, on selling, your own stories. And don't forget, length's not important. So this could be 30 pages or 90 pages or 200 pages. And don't forget, in the introduction, and maybe the introduction of every chapter, you talk about the 6 U's. Like, why is it important now? Why is it urgent now that we learn the selling techniques of Jesus? How could this be useful? How could it be user-friendly? How is it going to be ultra-specific? What techniques will we learn that Jesus used? And again, you could use historical examples from the Bible, from the culture of those times, from archaeology, from other stories or philosophers written about Jesus who have their own perspective. And you could also think about different sales situations where spiritual techniques or thinking in a way like Jesus would be helpful for those selling techniques. And you could specifically talk about, Jesus won over ultimately billions of people using, I don't want to call them techniques, it sounds sacrilegious, but using his way, his philosophy, he won over billions of people to his cause and to his beliefs. So, and again, it could be the Tao of selling or the Tao of persuasion or Zen and the art of charisma. Like, Buddha's an interesting story, for instance. Buddha was a prince who left his kingdom, didn't become the king, and became a monk who meditated all the time. And he had many monks who followed him and believed in his techniques about attaining nirvana and so on. Now, he put all of these monks in a grove in between 3 warring kingdoms. All these kingdoms were trying to kill each other. One of those kingdoms was the kingdom Buddha would have been the king of. So he had to be a really great diplomat or charismatic figure to survive. And there are many stories where people who otherwise would have hated Buddha for many reasons were won over by his charisma. So think of a book, Zen and the Art of Charisma, or Zen and the Art of Persuasion. Who knows? Zen and the Art of Diplomacy. Again, the list goes on. And you don't even have to pick a religious figure. You could have their neuroscience of salesmanship. So what happens in the brain? What are 20 different things that happen in the brain when you use neuroscience techniques to sell? Like, what's happening in the brains of the seller and the person you're selling to? So that could be the neuroscience of selling, or the neuroscience of dieting, or I don't know. There's many different types of concepts we can combine with these broader religious, spiritual, or scientific concepts. And again, these books could be 20 pages, 40 pages. I've already mentioned that, but these are great topics for podcasts. They're great topics for email lists. They're easy for sequels because you could build a brand around, again, the Muhammad diet technique. You could use other figures from Islamic history or Buddhist history or royal history, who knows? And there's probably hundreds of books you could write using this book framework.
This summer, Instacart is bringing back your favorites from 1999 with prices from 1999. That means 90s prices on juice pouches that ought to be respected, 90s prices on box mac and cheese, and 90s prices on ham, cheese, and cracker lunches. Enjoy all those throwbacks and more at throwback prices, only through Instacart. $4.72 maximum discount per $10 of eligible items. Limit 3 offers per order. Expires September 5th while supplies last. Discount based on CPI comparison.
Remember back in the section on the FK score, I talked about how you want to write at the 5th to 7th grade reading level, that those are the most readable books. For instance, Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway was written at a 5th grade level. The Harry Potter series, one of the most popular books in all of history, is written at between the 6th grade level and the 7th grade level. But some writing is written at the 20th grade level, meaning it's completely unreadable. And that's almost 99.99% of all academic papers. So there are millions of academic papers that are written and that they are stored on various databases on the web. And this is a treasure trove of valuable, proven scientific information that can be useful for books. And I'm going to show you a couple examples, but I'm going to describe the basic framework. Pick a category you love, once again. So for instance, it might be persuasion. It might be negotiation. It might be military strategies. It might be cooking. It might be anything. And just for fun, I wanted to find academic research on how to make small talk at a party, something I'm really bad at. And I found all of these academic papers about when small talk is useful in the office, small talk is useful, in an elevator or at a party, and what kinds of small talk you should use. And they do all sorts of studies with students and prove what small talk results in what benefits. It's a treasure trove of information. So here's the technique. You pick your topic. Let's say it's persuasion. Let's say it's happiness. Let's pick happiness. You go to various academic sites, and I'll show you which ones to go to, but ssrn.com is one, academia.edu is another, JSTOR.org is another. There are many. Or you can just Google academic research on happiness, and you'll see lists of academic papers show up. You find 30 or 20, however much you want, let's say 20 different academic papers on happiness. Now, the book might get called 20 scientifically proven techniques to have greater happiness in your life, or 20 scientifically proven techniques for happiness. And each chapter is another academic paper which suggests another way that they prove with scientific research. They do all sorts of studies, another technique for happiness. You freely admit there was a study done at Kansas University on you get more happiness by looking at the sun in the first 15 minutes of the day. I'm making that up. And you describe in layman's terms. Remember, their paper is unreadable. You're going to make it readable. You describe the technique that they researched. You describe their results. Maybe you find an interview. Why did they do this research? Why did they even expect to do this research? You tell your own personal story of how being outside in the morning lifted your mood during a time you were depressed. Maybe you have historical anecdotes or historical research, and you have 20 different chapters now. Each chapter is about 3 pages, so that's 60 pages. You write an introduction with the 6 U's. Oh, it's urgent because more people are depressed than ever. More people are, even though quality of life is higher than ever, more people are depressed than ever. So we know money is not linked to happiness. And it's user-friendly because you specifically say, I took all these impossible to read academic papers and made them easy to read. So it's user-friendly. Ultra-specific, like with just these 20 techniques, we cover everything from morning routines to diet to community on how to be happy. And again, you go through the 6 U's, you make your intro. Each chapter, you summarize a different academic paper, a different technique. That's the name of the chapter, is the technique. You summarize the academic paper that studied that technique and proved that it works. You tell a personal story, try to tell a historical story, and you move on to the next chapter. Boom. Within 20 to 25 days, you have 60 pages written, practically writes itself, and you move on to publishing it on Amazon. So, and you could do the publishing work, like finding a cover designer and so on, in parallel to writing the book. Again, I just talked about happiness, but let's look at some examples. I'm going to look at some examples of searching for happiness, searching for persuasion, searching for other things. And you can see how easy it is to write a book like this. And again, not a new topic. If I type small talk into or witty banter into Amazon, I'll see tons of tiny books where I'm sure they're creating income streams for these authors all along. Like I found one book about small talk that was written in 2020 that's still ranked #1 in the category of educational psychology. So these types of books, you could write fast, you could write many of them, and you could build an entire business out of creating income streams from books like this. And these are legitimate books because everything you're writing here is based on scientific research and your own personal experiences and your own personal stories. But don't forget always the 6 U's technique for writing the introductions. So now you've seen 4 frameworks by which you can write a great book in the next 30 days and publish it. And on top of it, I gave a bonus framework in the intro to this section called the podcast framework. And again, that's a framework that I use in my book, Think Like a Billionaire. And even Tim Ferriss used that technique in his book, Tools of Titans. Professor Brian Keating, author of Loser of the Nobel Prize, used that technique in Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner, which I actually wrote the foreword to. All of these techniques have been used by many people before, and they are good techniques for writing a book in the next 30 days. And again, go back to the intro of this whole course about why it's useful to write a book, but it's also fun. It's entertaining. You're going to write stories. You're going to get better. Hopefully this will be the beginning of you'll write more than one book, but even if not, you can use these books to enhance your professional career, to always have and be able to say, I wrote this. I wrote a physical book right in front of me. And that's exciting. And you should, again, celebrate your success and try other frameworks and other ideas, but know that nothing can hold you back from choosing yourself to write and publish a book that people will buy.
This summer, Pluto TV is exploding with thousands of free movies. Summer of Cinema is here. Feel the explosive action all summer long with movies like Gladiator, Mission Impossible, Beverly Hills Cop, Good Burger, and Transformers: Dark of the Moon. Bring the action with you and stream for free from all your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.